Hello, English 246 students. Making this video to get us started in earnest on our poems, which I hope you're already at least scribbling down some ideas about on paper. The way that this is going to work is we're going to have a workshop schedule in weeks 3 through 5 of the course. And the way that's going to work is we will have a couple people presenting their poems, a single poem for workshop, which I'm going to get to the assignment here in a second. And since you're going to probably be watching this video from a Canvas message, you can download the files below. They're also available on the modules tab. So in the discussion forum, I'm going to form workshop groups, and there'll be one person who's presenting their work, a primary responder who's responsible for giving a little bit more in-depth presentation, or excuse me, review of the work. I will also review the work both. I'll probably put handwritten notes on it and post a scanned file of it, and also go over my comments with the YouTube video. But everybody's going to comment on each of the poems. But the most important thing that I want you to keep in mind for now is to keep every draft, even if it's written on a cocktail napkin, because you're going to include that in your portfolio. And if you have anything handwritten, you can either scan it or you can take a picture with a smartphone and include it in the document for the portfolio, which I'll get to in a minute. So I just want to kind of give you an overview of how this is going to work before I get to the assignment. So here's the poetry assignment. This is what I'm asking you to do with your poems. I'm not going to restrict content or anything like that. What I am going to restrict is rhyming. Let's get to the assignment. What I'd like you to do is create at least 50 lines of original poetry. Now, this doesn't have to be a 50-line poem. This could be 5, 10-line poems. This could be any combination thereof, as long as it's 50 poems. Right, at least 50 lines of original poetry without rhyming, and post the poem or poems in the discussions tab by your scheduled time. And we had a roster issue, so I can get the schedule put out today. The class will comment on whatever you submit, but try to keep it under 5 pages of work. Now, do these poems have to be perfect? No. What I am expecting, though, is a clean manuscript. In other words, no typos or misspelled words unless it's intentional with what you're doing in the poem. Now, why do I take away rhyming? Because a lot of us, when we think of poetry, we think of rhyming, especially lyric poetry like you have in, say, songs and things of that nature. Well, English is a very difficult language to rhyme in. It's not like Spanish, where you have a lot of words that end in O or ah, so it's a lot easier to rhyme, or even Germanic languages, German, Scandinavian languages like Danish, even Gaelic, the Irish language and the Scottish language have similar endings to words, whereas in English we have such a pigeon of different languages, it's hard to rhyme. So I have the without rhyming rule because I don't want you to sacrifice the image you're trying to create or the idea you're trying to create because you're trying so hard to rhyme. Okay, here's some important guidelines for your poems. You must have imagery with the poem. Think about all aspects of imagery and decide which are necessary to use in this poem. Without images, without pictures that are created in the mind, whether it's a picture of a thing, of a color, of a sound, of a smell, of a movement, hard to convey ideas in poetry. Things to remember are images clear and interesting, enforce the meaning of the poem or what you're trying to cross, are the images appropriate of the poem. At least for the first draft, put your ideas on the page. Get everything on down or revise it to images and things like that. And your book has some good to follow that. And that's why we're doing the writing exercises and the discussion questions warmed up toward doing our own work. Your poem should use, or you should consider using, figure, and this means your poem will include elements of figurative language, metaphor, simile, things of that nature, and I'll get to those poetry terms here in a minute. Of your work, and this includes format of stanzas. This is a beginning creative writing class. I don't expect these things to be perfect, but I think about or take some time what your poem looks like, what the lines sound like, what you're presenting to the reader. So basically, I don't want just a bunch of ideas thrown on the page, but just some revisions so the idea of the poem is clear, or at least there's an effort made to convey an idea. Again, this class is based on effort, and if you're putting in the effort to create a poem and make it better, you're going to be perfectly fine. Meaning and idea. The poem should present an experience for the reader. It should work to communicate an experience that cannot be expressed in any other way. Don't put pressure on yourself with this. If it's coming from your brain and you're trying to express an idea, you should meet this requirement. We're looking for deeper meaning. So we're not, this is not cutesy poetry, not nursery rhyme type poetry. We're trying to express something interesting for our readers. And other guidelines here at the bottom, your poem should not have your name, or excuse me, should have your name and original title on it. In poetry, titles can be very informative. Sometimes the entire meaning of the poem is based on the title. So good thing to pay attention to. Should you agonize over the title at this point in the writing process? No, because in workshop we can suggest titles. But think about it and make sure your name's on each poem. Please don't rhyme your poem. This may be hard if you're used to doing it, but I do not want you to sacrifice meaning to rhyme. Bear with us. And if you want to add rhyming later before you send it off to be published somewhere, that's fine with me. Your poem or poems should be as free as possible from typographical errors. So I just want a clean manuscript, so make sure you edit it, spell check, that sort of thing. If 50 lines seems like too much, you are free to write 2 or 3 shorter poems, or even if you want to do 10 5-line poems, that would be okay, but for this, I would shoot for probably 2 to 3. Okay, so that is the poetry assignment, what I'm expecting of you. If you want to, you can pause the video and take a break, because we're going to go to the poetry terms. Now, you're taking a break. You back? Okay, you're back. Poetry terms. Some of the things that I may use as I'm talking about it, and also what I expect when you guys are workshopping your classmates' work. What are you going to talk about? So here are some things. They're just kind of a vocabulary for discussing poetry. First and foremost, alliteration. This is the repetition of initial identical consonant sounds or any vowel sounds in successive or closely associated syllables. The fair breeze blew, repetition of B sound, from the white foam flew, repetition of the F sound. Assonance is a repetition of vowel sounds. Lake and fake demonstrate rhymes, whereas lake and fate with a T would demonstrate assonance because they have that A sound in each of them, even though the words don't rhyme. A cliche is an expression used so often that its freshness and clarity have worn off. If you need to know what a cliche is, the best thing you can do is watch a sports press conference. Give 110%. We're taking it one day at a time. We're going through a process. Whatever fill in the blank type of cliche is, but it's a phrase that is too overused to really, it's lost its original punch. Home is where the heart is, would be an example of a cliche. Consonants, that's like assonance only with consonant sounds, where the consonant sounds are repeated within the word. And this is, again, different from rhyming. So the examples here are like add and read, where we have the repetition of the D sound, or mill and ball. Not rhyming words, but the consonant sounds are repeated. Enjambment. This is one of those things that you don't really learn when you're studying poetry so much, but it's something to be conscious of as we're writing it. Why? Because this is the continuation of a sense and grammatical construction of a line onto the next line. You can see the example here where there's no punctuation at the end of the line, so it's meant for the idea to carry over from the end of the line back into the front of the line. And that's an interesting thing to think about when you're writing your poems, is if you want your reader to stop on an idea, put some sort of hard punctuation at the end of the line, like a period, comma, colon, semicolon, a dash if you're a fan of Emily Dickinson or something like that. Okay, image. We've read about it quite a bit, but it's putting a picture in the reader's mind, usually of the five senses: sight, taste, touch, hearing, but also images of movement. That's called kinesthetic imagery, or images of even ideas. Abstract ideas can become an image in the reader's mind if you describe them well enough. How do you describe intuition in a poem, or deja vu? What does it feel like? Well, you're not describing something you can hold in your hands, but you are creating an image of a concept. So that's something you can do as well. Metaphor is a direct comparison. So that guy is a shark. Whereas a simile is using like or as. These are just some basic things in poetry that you're going to want to think about incorporating into your poems, or if you're reviewing your classmates' work. You can use these things. This line sounds a little cliche, or I love the assonance you've created here. The image in line 4 works really well for me, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's the poetry assignment and the poetry terms. If you need to take another break, you can. Pause the video. Pause button's right down there. Okay. So let's talk about workshopping guidelines. And this is what we are going to be doing in the workshop. Now, when I talk about the primary responder, what is your job if you are listed as a primary responder? I want you to go into more depth than just kind of or view of your classmates. And I do have rules on being a primary responder on the website. I'll point those out in a minute. But I've got the workshop guidelines, which you can download below, for workshopping, and this really goes for any kind of creative work: poetry, fiction, drama, creative nonfiction as well. Workshop is a process by which you gather the suggestions and impressions of your colleagues on your work. In the Discussions tab, the group will discuss your writing in a thread created for your workshop week, and I will designate the workshop weeks here very shortly. Like I said, there was a roster issue. During this time, the writer will be asked to remain silent and not post any comments about their work. So if you do post, if it is your week to post your poem, I'm asking that there be a gag order on the author. You're not explaining anything. If somebody makes a comment, you have to let it be. After a week of discussion about the work, the author will be allowed to post questions and comments. So you have a gag order while your classmates comment on the work, and then once they've commented on it, you can ask questions of your classmates. Now, as a writer, remember the work that we read for the workshop is a rough draft. And the idea is to get some reactions before you revise the work again. We're not expecting you to turn in perfect work. If you can write the perfect work, you don't need to be in the class. After you post your work for discussion, expect to hear the good and not so good, and expect to take the work back to your desk and revise, revise, revise. Because that's what writing really is revision. Most people can write a draft, can put ideas on the page, but to craft it and make it sound better and improve it, that's what writing really is. Now, that being said, one thing that needs to be made clear, any work you bring to workshop needs to be technically flawless. Basic level grammatical and mechanical errors are unacceptable. Typographical errors and spelling errors only suggest that you did not take the time to proofread your work. Manuscript preparation is part of your participation grade, or your participation and effort in the course as a whole, and will be reflected in your final course grade. Just make sure that you're putting together a good manuscript, and this will all take care of itself. This may be the hardest part of a workshop. Be open-minded about the comments by your fellow writers. Focus on what seems to be helpful and what you can use. Some of the suggestions you may get may not seem too helpful. Some will come as blinding insights. Take it all in stride, and always be ready to ask me or the class about your work if you aren't getting the kind of response that you want. But remember, this is after the gag order period. Finally, it's remember that the workshop is personal character. You'll hear praise when due, but most of the time you'll probably hear that your writing needs work. Either way, we're talking about your work and not you, so don't take this stuff personally. Remember that everybody's goal when they're commenting on your work is to make your work better. And you know, if that's the goal, it should be the goal for every writer. Just take it in stride. And you know, are you going to implement every change that's suggested? Of course not. But remember that all of the criticism comes from a good place. It's to make your work better. In order for the workshop to function effectively, you should read and comment on student work prior to reading any of your classmates' responses. So this is for reviewers. I expect copious page-by-page comments. In your response, you should use a different text color to indicate your comments within the text. So the person's going to post in the discussion board. What you can do is copy that to your response, and then when you're about to comment, there's an option up at the top of your reply to change the color. You can change the text color to fill in comments. Another way to do this is download it and put it into a file and use the comment function in Word to put your comments. You should feel free to make editorial suggestions concerning the word syntax, paragraph structure, and so forth. What works well and note what doesn't. And this is really important. If you find yourself leaning one way or the other, too positive or too negative, make sure that you go back and offer either constructive criticism or praise where needed. It should be a good mix of the two. If you have a scanner, you can handwrite your comments and attach it to your reply. That's probably what I'm going to do because I like to mark up manuscripts. Either way, mark that page up. Now, when you're the reviewer, this is what you should do, this process you should go through. Read each piece at least twice. The first time, I would avoid making comments, just kind of a general sense of it. Then the second time, you can go through and make your comments. Please print your name legibly on the work if you are scanning it, or type it at the end so the writer knows who wrote what, so he or she can ask you questions later if necessary. At the end of the commentary period, the author will be allowed to ask you questions about your response. So, you know, please be courteous if they ask questions that you do respond fairly promptly. Okay, reviewer commentary. This is in addition to what you're putting on the manuscript. In addition to the page-by-page commentary, I expect each reviewer to provide an articulate typewritten end comment for each piece. A suitable minimum length is 100 words. So this is a paragraph. It's not, so I'm not asking you guys to write a book on the work overall. You mark up the manuscript, write a paragraph, kind of summing up your comments. Mention what's working well in the draft. Point out suggestions for revision. Raise questions. Offer honest judgments and constructive criticism. Use your end comment as a space to articulate a big picture response to the piece as a whole. Be honest, but be compassionate and polite. You are going to be giving constructive criticism, but it's important that you keep a polite tone and make suggestions. We're not trying to rip anybody apart here, and that's the goal is to make the work better. If you are listed as PR or primary reviewer on the schedule, your response needs to be a minimum of 200 words. For your primary reviews, I want you to go into as much depth as possible about the work. In addition, I expect the primary reviewer to be one of the first people to respond to the work to get the conversation going. And this is going to rotate throughout. And I'm going to try and create a schedule where if you go, say, first with poetry, that you're going to go maybe toward the end with fiction, and then somewhere near the middle with creative nonfiction. Just so to keep it, I'm going to keep it as even and fair as possible. As an instructor, I will provide a written and a video review of the piece. You're welcome to add a video review of the piece to your primary response if you'd like. I expect you to participate verbally in the class discussion. It goes without saying that a workshop depends on active participation of every member in the community. It is a crucial component of your participation grade in this course. In other words, don't just post your review and leave it at that. Come back maybe a day or two later and see what you have there, and maybe continue the conversation. Maybe another writer or reviewer notice something that you did not, or maybe they notice or they're commenting on something that you talked about with the work. It's a conversation and it should go on throughout the workshop week. Last, please remember to print and or save 2 copies of your end comment. One is going to the author, and one in your portfolio. Please save your work because, and I'm going to get to the portfolio checklist in a minute, that you need to save every review, every comment. Now on the discussion board, that's pretty easy, but what's the hardest to save everything up is each draft. So if you're writing completely on a computer, have poem 1, poem 1A. Each time you have a new draft, collect that in the portfolio. Okay, the very end of this, I offer these thoughts and guidelines only with the best of intentions, in the hopes of promoting fair, open, and dynamic workshop atmosphere in the class. You know what you want when it's a piece critiqued. The best way I know to ensure that you want is to offer it first to others. And as always, if you have any questions, please contact me. So that's what the workshopping guidelines are. That's what we're going to be doing starting in week 3. So the last thing I have to do on this video, or I'd like to talk about in this video, is the portfolio checklist. If you need to take a break, pause button just down in the corner. But the file should be in the Canvas message below. So go take your break. Okay, we're back. All right, the portfolio checklist, and this is for each of the portfolios in the class. So the poetry portfolio, fiction portfolio, creative nonfiction portfolio. So what are you going to need in it? You're going to need your creative work, and I'm going to let you read most of this on its own. But what I want you to do is to save every draft, and if you handwrite any of it, please take a picture with your phone and convert it to a Word file, PDF, whatever it might be, and each of your drafts along the way. Now for the portfolio, you're going to include your final draft, which I expect to be at least 1 revision past your workshop. So it's the latest version of your work, but it should be changed or somewhat different than the workshop version. Unless, and this is very unusual, you turn in a perfect draft in the workshop, and that almost never happens. Even in graduate school, that never happens, very rarely, if ever, happens. So all your creative work, all the drafts culminating in your final draft. An author's note. Now I am going to read this one because I want you to think about your process in writing, because thinking through the process of writing is going to help make it faster in the future and also help improve your writing process. So the first draft to final draft is not only faster, but it's a better process. An author's note regarding your writing in the portfolio. This is a 1 to 2 page typewritten note is a reflective self-evaluation of your writing practice over the course of the 5-week unit. What do you like about your work? What don't you like? What have you been struggling with? Have you had any breakthroughs? How have you seen your writing improve over the course of the term? Please be honest, thoughtful, and serious. However, this is not an opportunity for you to criticize the class. Please be funny or tell me about your weekend. This is a genuine opportunity for you to reflect critically on your work. So in other words, talk about what you've done well, what you haven't done well in the unit, and what you've maybe struggled with, what you really liked. But yeah, it's really not an opportunity to say, well, I didn't get any helpful feedback, or I didn't like any of the feedback I got. You could discuss rather why you disagreed with the feedback, or the feedback maybe made you notice something you didn't know was there, and so you struggled with that because you didn't want to accept that advice, but in the end maybe decided it was good. Finally, in the portfolio, you need a complete set of your typewritten responses. So you can print your discussion board posts or copy and paste them, however you want to do that. Now, when you put together the portfolio at the end of the unit, try to get it on as few of files as possible. It is possible to have, the first version of your poem, page break, the next version of your poem, and so on. As long as it's clear what draft is which, it's fine. If you need to turn in multiple documents, that's fine as well, as long as you name them so that it's easy for me to follow. Okay, so it's kind of up to you, but the important thing is that it's easy for me to follow, because it's, you want it to be easy for me to grade. Each response must be typed and should be approximately 100 words in length. You can include the file from your computer or a copy of it from the Discussions tab. These are copies of the responses that you give your classmates when you are workshopping their work. Feedback is essential for revision, so please do your classmates the courtesy of giving them responses. Make sure that you include your longer, more detailed primary reactor response as well. Okay, each portfolio will receive a letter grade. Each portfolio counts as 20% of your writing grade for this course. I will give handouts specific to each portfolio at least 1 week prior to the due date. And there is a poetry, the poetry assignment is posted in Canvas. Revision. For the purposes of your portfolio, a revision is a revisioning or to see again of each draft. Each revision must be a new vision of the previous draft and make significant progress at developing the piece. When I put comments on your writing assignments, I do not mark everything, and if you make simple corrections on your final draft from a writing exercise, it will be noticeable. As I mentioned above, elbow grease counts in this class. The piece should demonstrate that careful effort has been made to improve the work. Now, how many drafts do you need in your portfolio is probably a question some of you will have. I would say probably at least, well, it's definitely 3 at minimum. The first draft, which is getting the ideas on the page, you polish that up for the workshop. So you have a workshop draft, and then whatever you've done to the work after the workshop. I'm not setting a minimum or limit to the number of drafts for each poem. I wouldn't like at least 3. Short story or one I play, we're actually going to do creative nonfiction because each piece is different and may require a different amount of work. But like I said, at minimum, you're probably going to have at least 3. Rough draft, workshop draft, final draft. So here's your checklist for your portfolio. You need your work, the 50 lines of poems, 5 pages of fiction or 5 pages of drama, the revisions, your author's note, your complete workshop responses. Now for drafts, your final draft must be typed in 12-point font. If early drafts of your work are handwritten, it's okay to scan them and include them with your portfolio. For the author's note and workshop responses, these all need to be typed, of course. It's an online class, so by nature it's going to be typed. And the last thing says emailed as attachments. Actually, I'm going to create a Canvas assignment shortly that you'll be able to submit all of this into. Okay, well, that's the end of this very long video, and I appreciate you hanging in there with me. If you have any questions, please let me know. But like I said, I'm going to be creating a workshop schedule shortly. If you have a little PR by your name, that means you're the primary actor for that person. If your name is one of the first to go for poem, and I think for the first week, for week 3, we'll just have one person being workshop since we have 7 in the class. And then we'll do 3 in the next 2 weeks. We'll do 1 or 2. We'll see how it goes. But I'll work that schedule out tonight. So in the meantime, get to work. Start scratching out some ideas for poems. If you need idea generating activities, let me know and I'll give you some resources. I really love teaching this course, and I really look forward to reading your work and helping you guys become better poets, better writers, whatever you want to be. So again, please let me know if you have any questions. Text me, email me, call me in my office, and I will be there to help.